health, wellness, and technology. Each episode, we bring together a diverse array of perspectives to explore how music and sound can improve our lives. In this episode, we tune into the emerging world of sound, psychedelics, and altered states of consciousness. With guests Dr. Alexandre Lehmann, neuroscientist and professor at McGill University, and principal investigator at the Brain Beats and Bionics Lab. Hayden Smith, co-founder of the Cyberdelic Society and the London Experimental Psychonautic Club. And Dre Jury, aka Anilah, musician, composer, audio engineer, psychoacoustic sound designer, and music therapist. Immersed is brought to you by StudioFeed. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the show.
Welcome, guys. Good to see you all. We have a great, diverse group of guests today. It's such a fascinating topic. I think, why don't we just start with something fairly simple, which I think a lot of people are interested in. How did you guys all start in this journey? What brought you to this fascinating subject of sound and altered states? Alex, maybe you can kick it off.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to be here. Hi, everyone. For me, I'd say it was the intersection of different interests around the turn of the millennium. So 1999, I grew really interested in the rave phenomena and how people were having really intense experiences, emotional bonding, listening to and dancing to loud music for hours and sometimes days. And that got me really curious about the relationship between music and altered states. And I started to go down the rabbit hole that led me to the concept of trance and how a lot of ancient cultures were using sound and movement, to go into a trance thousands of years ago, and how there were some striking similarities between these two phenomena. Some people even refer to this as, techno shamanism. And so going deeper, I realized there were cultures down in the Amazon basin that were using sound as a way to heal in conjunction with altered states of consciousness. They even had special songs that they were using as medicine to treat certain conditions. And so for me, that was the beginning of a long journey of trying to unpack the relationship between music and sound, and on the other hand, altered states of consciousness, with initially a curiosity to try and understand the mechanisms in terms of, brain, body, but more and more increasingly now looking at the therapeutic applications, how we can merge the ancient and the novel technologies to create something that can bring healing and well-being to all kinds of people who suffer in a way that is completely legal and affordable and scalable.
Really interesting, Alex. I think hopefully you'll be touching on some of the ancient practices a little bit later on in our discussion. Thanks for that. Drea, how about you?
Yeah, so my interest in the intersection between sound and psychedelics, and as well as sound, music, and the healing capabilities really started when I was a performing musician, and just really got to see firsthand the direct influence that music had on the listener, and really was just struck over and over again by how deeply impactful music was for people. And it's interesting. My background is in like the performing arts. I started out playing pretty much like heavy metal music,
Awesome.
but also was in the festival scene, so in the rave scene. And so I was seeing all these different ways that music was being used, but specifically with going to a lot of metal shows, playing metal shows, I actually was able to see this really interesting interaction between what some people would consider is other people had these full-on mystical kind of cathartic experiences that would have, a really lasting effect for them therapeutically. So I found that personally really fascinating. And so from there, I started to really go deeper into that relationship between music and therapeutic applications. And when I was doing music therapy in a one-on-one situation, that's also when I started to become more and more interested in the therapeutic aspects of music, because I was seeing so many beautiful results with people, both with resolution of like mental health issues, but also nervous system issues.
Right.
So all those things kind of played into this deepening curiosity of the power of music, for sure.
Right, and it's a super important time to be having these discussions, I suppose. Absolutely. Carl, how about you? How did things kick off with you, and what were the kinds of things that inspired you to pick up the kinds of projects that you're leading? Yeah,
I think I've always been obsessed with sound, mad record collector, and always interested in the power of sound over any other art form to just immediately get you into different, different moods and different states of consciousness. And then getting to combine music with psychedelics has always been a fascination, because it's almost as if each psychedelic enables context switching. So you're able to listen to the same music with a different medicine, and then you're almost hearing different types of sound through that filter. So it's been a really fascinating journey, just being part of a lot of different clinical trials. One at Imperial, the DMT study that I've been part of for 6 years, seeing music getting composed for that medicine has been, super interesting, and being able to sort of dive into that, but also being a facilitator. And I facilitate 5-MeO DMT sessions, and the ability when somebody's coming back from a journey to actually imprint a sound onto that experience. So I use like singing bowls, Tibetan singing bowls, and a typical example, it's great to use a real instrument in that setting, because if those people are then hearing Tibetan singing bowls later on without the medicine, they may actually go back into that mind state. So yeah.
Wow, fascinating. Just riffing off of this, I mean, it's sort of the main topic of this discussion. How have you guys observed this idea of the role of music and sound in these transformational journeys? And then maybe we can talk a little bit further as far as maybe the future of what we're looking at here. I know some of you are really at the front end of a lot of interesting projects. Maybe coming back to you, Carl, digging in a bit deeper, what have you observed as this role of music and sound within these altered states and journeys?
It's absolutely fundamental. I think that if you look at the kind of work that's happening now with people like John Hopkins, Mendel with his Wavepaths project, which I know Drea's involved in, it's becoming essential with the psychedelic renaissance that we have support structures for both preparation of such journeys, but also integration of them. And I think that, the kind of work that's being done now and the recognition that's being given to sound as a powerful tool in those sessions is vital, because the psychedelic renaissance is always very fragile. And I think that if we can have not just sound, but also visual support, and it's a case of what are all the other modalities that can be used to help integrate a psychedelic experience or to help you get through a tough experience. I think that's why it's so important that these things are given the kudos that they deserve. But it's also fascinating to sort of try novel substances like DIPT. DIPT only affects the auditory system, so it's almost as if there's certain substances there that are absolutely necessary for exploration.
Well, Trey, how about you? I would love to maybe talk a bit about Wavepaths as well, but what role are you seeing with music and sound as far as how it impacts and can impact the journey?
Yeah, so specifically in regard to what we're finding out with Wavepaths, and some of you know Mendel Kaelin, the CEO of Wavepaths. He did a lot of research at Imperial, and they're continuing to do research with Wavepaths in terms of how the music is being received, the different aspects of what is working, what's not. And the thing that keeps coming up over and over again is it's not a one size fits all situation. It's just not. There's no standard of care yet. They're trying to create a standard of care with ketamine, but it's the main point that I think is important for people to understand, especially if you're creating or you're facilitating these experiences at home or whatever. It's that the same stimulus does not create like a reliable result in terms of sound. It's highly variable. So in these sessions with psychedelics, what could be a relaxing sound or frequency for one person could actually be traumatic for another person. And there's so much nuance there. I think that we're very much on the threshold of understanding these nuances, but I think music can create such an amazing kind of framework and stability within these highly chaotic and mysterious experiences. So I think when used wisely, like the music can create this holding space for someone to go through a transformational experience. Yeah.
Indeed. Are you able to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with Wavepaths, Drea, even if it's just, very summary, and, with respect to some of the individuality and the importance of having very specific sounds?
Yeah. So with Wavepaths, I mean, it's essentially an app. It's a musical tool that's highly adaptive to each listener. So, going back to the statement that the music is received by the listener in very, very different ways. Wavepaths is a way for both the listener and the therapist that is using the app to create a highly adaptive, responsive musical environment. So within the Wavepaths tool, there's many different nuances and layers to the music. So, for example, if someone is becoming distressed during a psychedelic experience, you can choose to bring in different layers of the sound that will have a different reaction in the listener. So it's very, very nuanced that way. And each layer in the program is very much tailored to the listener. Yeah.
Wow, fascinating. And we'll make sure to send links out to the audience so they can take certain things for a test drive, so to speak. Alex, how about you, my friend? Where are you seeing the role of music and sound?
Yeah, I mean, that's really fascinating topic. We could spend a full hour just on that, but to give a few pointers from the scientific perspective, we really have two body of evidence here regarding the role of music in psychedelic experiences, particularly therapeutic experiences. One is what modern science has been doing since the 50s, and the conclusion is that we know extremely little about it. The classical model for psychedelic therapy uses a fixed playlist. If you talk about psilocybin therapy, a 6-hour playlist, mostly classical music, same playlist for everyone. And actually, the very playlist from the 50s is still being used in clinical trials today, even though the past couple of years we've seen a lot of change. On the other hand, we have the body of evidence from the traditions that have been doing that for thousands of years. And for some of them, music acts as a support, as a kind of a lifeline, or Ariane's thread. For some of them, music is going to actively guide you, or sometimes music will shape the experience completely in terms of precipitating the healing. And so if we take a step back and try to see where we're at, and this is going to sound like an infomercial for Wavepath, but Mendel Kaelen, mentioned by my two other colleagues, is certainly the person who has done the most research on the topic, and highly recommend reading his PhD thesis actually on music and psychedelics. It's available online. And what we know is that music, the resonance with music and the openness to music has a big impact on therapeutic outcomes. And so what has been tried to accomplish in the past couple of years is to see to what extent, as mentioned, this is not a one size fits all. Can we use different kinds of music for different people? Can we change the music online based on what people are experiencing? And this is not too far from some traditions that will spontaneously start to make some noise or sounds if they see the person is being too agitated, to bring them back to a more peaceful state. And so currently I'm involved with two collaborations with Mendel Kaelen that we're doing at McGill. One is we are exploring the role of music in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and also looking at the role of silence. So what happens when there is no music? And some individuals actually do better with silence, and some individuals do better with music. And finding the proper balance is probably a topic of great interest for the next couple of years. And also we are starting a project involving other universities, including Johns Hopkins and UCSF, to look at the role of music in psilocybin-assisted therapy, with the idea here that instead of taking the same playlist for everyone, can we create a playlist that is going to resonate with the person based on their culture, value, beliefs, demographics, geographical situation, but also find ways that there can be some adaptation of the music during the very experience. And last but not least, what comes out of a lot of these findings is that in a psychedelic experience, music can be very soothing, or it can be also extremely distressing. And it's not necessary that you want to have a peaceful, pleasant experience, but rather what is being found is that it's your degree of openness to the experience, your degree of openness to the music, that is going to predict the therapeutic outcome. And so another venue is also doing some preparation using mindfulness, for example, before going into the journey, for participants to be more open to what manifests, whether extremely pleasant or extremely uncomfortable.
Interesting. And I mean, I guess it's more of a personal comment, but I tend to be fairly sensitive as far as what kind of music is played, what style. I'm not one that just goes into a place. How much does that sort of come into the studies that you're looking at, Alex, as far as people's initial interest and the kinds of things they're interested in, as opposed to just serving it? I suppose you've already touched on that, but if you have any way to elaborate, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, people don't go into those experiences to have a good time or be entertained. So it's a bit of a different mindset from if you go to a party or to a space where there's music, you don't necessarily want to be liking the music but on the other hand, having this open-minded approach, being mindful that the way you're going to perceive music, not only hear it but perceive it in your body, is going to be radically different from your everyday perception. But that being said, one of the things that are being looked at, for example, in some experimental trial, is can you work with the person to select some pieces that they like, that make them feel at ease, so that they start the journey with something that they know, something that they're comfortable with. Then you go into something that is more therapeutic. And then at the end of the session, you go back to some of the songs they may have pre-selected. And that's going to act as a cognitive reminder. I'm recognizing this music. This is the end of the journey, and help them also get back to their senses in a way that feels home or comfortable, plus the sense of empowerment, because they're part of the design.
Wow, fascinating. Thanks for that, Alex. Really appreciate it. Carl, over to you for a quick question here. You list a couple of projects in your bio that just sound very fascinating. Cyberdelic Society. What are Cyberdelics?
So yeah, I guess the Cyberdelic is an opportunity to democratize the psychedelic experience, because as we're hearing, there's a lot of issues with people maybe not wanting to give up control, which is kind of a requirement of a psychedelic experience. And obviously there's legality issues with psychedelics. So Cyberdelics is an opportunity to generate altered states using technology.
Okay.
And there's a lot of work going into hearables as one of those aspects of the technology. So for instance, all the work being done in binaural beats, for instance, where you could induce, for instance, a delta state and trick the brain into thinking that you've had a little rest. So that, you know, there's those, and then there's apps out there. There's one called Mind Song, which actually uses your brainwaves, turns your brainwaves into sound. So if you're in a very hectic state, you'll hear that reflected in this sort of very quantified self way. So that if you're able to then meditate, you can have this feedback loop where you're actually hearing your physiological state change according to that sound. So those are some examples of hearables, and I think that you know, there's so much viz tech out there that hearables, for instance, I think will be massive, and you're seeing lots of things come onto the market, which you could class as cyberdelics. But I was listening to Mendel yesterday in a session with John Hopkins talking about their recordings done in Teos Caves down in Venezuela. And Mendel, who's been doing a lot of field recordings for a long time, says that just, you know, the turning on of recording means that he's really amplifying his listening, you know, during those sessions. So I think, yeah, using technology as an aid for introspection, introception as well, just this ability to really amplify listening, because, you know, we're all in this throwaway culture where unfortunately Spotify and MP3s have really diminished our emotional connection to the sound, because it's stripped away. The dynamic range of an MP3 is stripping away the emotion. And I think that music's really, and sound generally, has massively degraded. Even if it's amazing sound, you're not hearing it because of the way we're presenting it.
Right, and I would also add the shrinking of the sound reproduction equipment that we use, that closer and closer down to just a phone or a smart speaker.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, at home I have, sorry to interrupt, so at home I have a library of analog recorded vinyl. So I've got about 10,000 records. I know Snooks in the background here will appreciate this, but having analog recorded vinyl played on an analog sound system, it's like you're as close as you can be to the original recordings of those tracks and those. So it's like time travel, and the spatialized, you know, being able to hear instruments spatialized is a fantastic tool, especially when combined with psychedelics.
Right. What's your spatial technology of choice? Just curious.
Well, I mean, I'm old school. I've got like very old technology. I haven't actually gone down a surround sound system yet, but I feel like I get surround sound just because I'm engaging that full dynamic range.
Right. I mean, one of the things I'd love to touch on here is the role of low frequencies in these experiences, bass frequencies, so to speak. Again, just back to this idea of the reproduction just shrinking and shrinking. Sometimes those grounding frequencies aren't there. What are you guys seeing in your travels and in your studies? Maybe we can start with Drea and how sort of low frequencies are being introduced in this sort of era of smaller and smaller sound reproduction. Is that something you think is important, or case by case?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's so much nuance in terms of the context that, like when we're talking about low frequencies, there's a lot of nuance in how those would be received, and then why, for example, you would be using them specifically within a psychedelic context. I know that there's some research out there that speaks to how certain low frequencies can actually be registered in the nervous system as a threat. And so that's kind of the confusing bit about that. I think there's conflicting research around low frequencies and why and how you would use them. But as a musician and as a producer, I see low frequencies as sometimes serving a function of aiding a catharsis response in the listener. But again, there's a lot of nuance there. Yeah.
Right. And perhaps in another discussion, we'll start to talk about things like sonic warfare and how low frequencies are used to sort of induce terror to people. But Alex, on your end, just curious in the role of low frequencies, even if you want to pull in, more traditional drums and ceremony and that type of thing.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I mean, I do agree with you that we live in a world where, we're losing the low end of music more and more. What we know from research is that, low frequencies, they lay the rhythmic foundations of music. They actually contribute strongly to the sense of groove. And a concept such as groove has just barely started to be, studied in an academic way. The whole field of music perception, music cognition, music neuroscience is very, very young. We're talking, 15, 20 years max. And so, people that study groove, the idea that music makes you want to move along, really have shown that, the low frequencies have a clear role in there. We're exploring at the moment a study on the impact of low frequency stimulation on stress relief, for example. But coming to your point, also about more traditional ways of using music. So there's this great paper by a researcher, I think in the UK, Neil Todd. I don't remember quite the title, but it's something like "Why Your Kids Won't Turn the Volume Down" or something like that. And there's this interesting demonstration that if you play very loud, so more than 90 dB, repetitive music with a strong low frequency content, then you start to stimulate some parts of the nervous system that generate pleasure. So you start to stimulate the vestibular organ. And so you get some of the kicks and the thrills that you would get if you would be like bungee jumping or on a roller coaster through this very loud, repetitive, low frequency music content. And so in this paper, they then reflect on the fact that, before technology and amplified sound, you needed a lot of people and large instruments to create such, loud, repetitive, 90 dB plus type of stimulation. And that if you look at a lot of cultures around the world, it's actually the guidelines they've been following of creating those soundscapes that are going to activate some specific pleasure pathways in the brain body.
Fascinating. Just riffing off of the role of soundscapes here, one perhaps slightly controversial topic, but something that I'm keeping an eye on here is the role of the artist in these altered states, for therapeutic purposes. There seems to be sort of a more of a trend towards generative AI-driven music. Just curious, as far as the role of, how you see, Drea, the role of the artist in this, new way of composing, so to speak, balanced against, on the one end of the spectrum, let's say fully AI-driven music with very little artist involvement.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting question and definitely a rabbit hole. But I would say that for myself, I'm interested in the synergy for sure between both the kind of AI generation of music and then the artist facilitated music. I think there is this place for the synergy. And in terms of the artist's role, where I go when I think about this is specifically in regard to adding the human quality. I think there's going to be a whole new kind of musical training and a need for a new type of musical training for artists that address this issue. So that's something that's really fascinating to me. But I think that specifically with what I'm seeing with working with Wavepaths, as well as my experience working one-on-one with people, it's good to know, it's good to be able to track the listener's response in terms of their biological response or nervous system response, and to see that in a measurable way. However, there is that nuance of the artist's role in using other senses to pick up how the music is being received and how it's influencing the listener. And that kind of goes into the use of the voice and how impactful the human voice can be on the nervous system, for sure. Yeah.
Right. Carl or Alex, you guys care to riff off of this idea of the artist's role? Let's say vis-a-vis, purely AI or generative music. I know there's an overlap there, etc. But you guys want to add to that rabbit hole of a topic?
Yeah, I mean, just from my perspective, I'm super fascinated by like audio synthesis and the ability to sort of feed all, for instance, the Beatles songs into an AI and then have the AI produce new Beatles songs. I think that's a fascinating area where we can get the most out of the AI. I think that we're super snobbish about the human in a lot of these experiences. I think that if we were to understand in a sort of an Umwelt hacking idea that, how does a dog hear? How does a bat hear? Like, I know that there's work being done where there's full-on echolocation devices being built built into people's sensorial, into their hearing. So yeah, what would it mean if we start hearing like other species, and what would that mean for music if we were to compose for other animals?
That's a whole other topic.
Yeah, on that topic, I mean, I do think a lot of people have opinions on, the role of the artist versus more maybe generative system. And the truth is, from a scientific perspective, we don't have data. We don't have any evidence. Those questions are just starting to be asked, and people, including some of my colleagues, designing the protocols to ask them. But we don't really have the good answer. And when we think about the rollout of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, with ketamine being legal, MDMA becoming legal in probably 2 years, and psilocybin shortly after that, there's this balance between curating the best possible experience, but also training enough therapists so that they can give and treat the number of growing, demanding people that will need to access this medicine. And so most likely at the end of the day, finding the optimal balance between quality and scaling would require some combination of computerized system using some kind of human composed music. To what extent, it's hard to say, but it really depends. If you have unlimited resources and unlimited time and you want to create the best experience possible, or if you want to bring a decent, high quality, evidence-based healing to millions of people, you're not going to go the same route, obviously. And again, the next few years will probably bring a lot of answers to these questions, and they will be quite exciting and entertaining to watch and to listen to, for sure.
Right. And I'm sure, Drea, you would co-sign this, but artists must be fascinated with all of these new advancements and perhaps some new and innovative ways to compose, so to speak. I mean,
yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think for myself personally, I would love for the music that I create to be informed in part by the research, specifically when it comes to, for example, composing entire works just for PTSD or just for end-of-life care, or so I think I'm personally really excited to like for artists to look more into the research. Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, Dre, not to put you on the spot, but have you seen anything out there around curriculum for these types of things, or just basic guideposts for artists on how to create for these different scenarios, therapeutic?
No, I think like I really haven't seen much, and what I am seeing more so is a lot of pseudoscience, a lot of just kind of assumptions, and that's why I kind of highlighted that point at the beginning where it's like we really are just learning about the impact of music in this way. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to more research for sure.
Lots of potential for sure.
Yeah.
Teach it in schools as well. I think there's a lot of room to overhaul a lot of music education, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. Carl, curious to get your perspective on DMT in particular. I know you had been involved in a 6-year study, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear a little bit from you around your experiences there and some of the outcomes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's been a real journey in terms of different types of recording technologies. So EEG was the first phase with intravenous DMT, and then EEG plus fMRI. I would not recommend getting injected with DMT inside an fMRI scanner, but yeah, truly profound in the sense of the impact that the scanner had on the experience.
Right.
I think, you know, as you may know about fMRI, incredibly loud device, and I think that attracted a lot of entities to the space, and he's still integrating that experience. But I've just come out of DMT Extended, where you are kept at the peak of the DMT journey. 6 of us luckily did the pilot, including some of the people running the study, and I did 5 different dosing sessions over 3 months. And yeah, I can tell you that not for the faint-hearted, that one. Can't really tell you too much because that study's still happening. But yeah, I mean, like I say, I'm really interested in how do you design sound for such extreme experiences to keep you grounded. I don't actually experience much sound in a DMT experience, which is a shame. And there are a lot of people who experience high-pitched sounds and all sorts of traditional, you know, very, very sort of motifs that complete silence for me in DMT realm, which is a shame.
Are you surprised that study got funded, or no?
I think they in terms of DMTX, they are definitely, yeah. There's been a lot of people trying to get it funded, and I guess they got there first. But yeah, I guess it's very interesting working in these extreme psychedelic states, and they're very careful about the volunteers and making sure they're properly vetted so that they don't have any car crashes on their hands.
Indeed. Alex, would love to come over to you for a second. Are you surprised at, I guess, how accelerated the sort of adoption of ketamine, psilocybin, MDMA therapies, etc., are coming into, you know, our culture? And, you know, within that, are you noticing, and this is a tough question here, it may be too long to answer, but are you noticing any differences that the role of music and sound can play, let's say, in the difference between MDMA, ketamine, and psilocybin assisted therapies?
Yeah, no, sure. And as a side note to what Carl was mentioning, you know, most of this research to date has been funded by private donors, you know, philanthropy. A very small fraction of this research is receiving government funding. Okay, this is starting to change as of this year with one major grant in the States from NIDA for psilocybin research for nicotine addiction. But most of the research is funded by really enthusiastic philanthropists who are excited about this. But this is still very frontier and it used to be very fringe, especially when I first got interested in this topic. It was extremely fringe. I remember I was a student. I registered with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And so I would receive their bulletin and 2000, 2001, and you would have these stories about MDMA for PTSD and how soon this would be available. And turns out it took much more time than expected. And so I've been watching the field for a while, and it felt for almost a decade that things were extremely sluggish. But since around 2016, 17, things have accelerated a lot. And that's in part because of the attraction of private capital for-profit companies. So there's this idea that researchers and pioneers in the space have de-risked the space, essentially. They've proven that there's a therapeutical value, that is safe, there are benefits. They've done the hard work of making this topic a respectable topic you can talk about in scientific journals, which was not the case 15 years ago. And so now that the opportunity is there, you have a lot of private for-profit capital that is jumping in the space, which is explaining the hyperbolic acceleration that we're seeing now. It's, almost every week there's a press release of a new company or a new drug or a new something. And so the haste and sometimes lack of care of the past couple of years really contrasts with the slow, meticulous, robust work of the past 20 years. And that's really something to be mindful of if we want to be sure that these experiences are being made available in a way that is truly healing and empowering and equitable. That everyone can access these experiences and they don't just become the reserved to a happy few. So now coming to your point about music, there are a lot of differences in how music is used with ketamine therapy or with MDMA or with psilocybin, mimicking some of the fundamental differences also in how these drugs work. So duration is our first contrast. Ketamine session is going to be an hour and a half, whereas psilocybin we're talking 6-7 hours. So the journey, the pace, the way the actual pharmacodynamic of the drug work are mimicked in how a music session is designed to support. Another big difference between, say, MDMA versus psilocybin is that in a psilocybin therapy, you mostly are lying down, eye shades, listening to music, going inwards. You might need some support. You might need to talk from time to time, but it's minimal. Also because a high dose of psilocybin not really conducive to you chatting. On the other hand, MDMA, because of the nature of the substance that is very pro-social, it makes you want to share, makes you want to get closer to people, makes you create safe bonding with individuals. The music for MDMA is chosen in a way that is going to allow for you to chat with the therapist, talk about your experience. Especially, it's being used mostly for post-traumatic stress disorder now. So it's something that requires you re-experiencing and sharing about your trauma. And so the music is going to be there to guide you, to provide you a safe support, but not necessarily for you to go deeply inside as you with the psilocybin. And ketamine, again, is also a different beast, and that's going to depend a lot on how experienced you are and how high of a dose you can give to patients. And depending on that, there will be more or less talking and more or less silence or more or less depths of introspection going on.
Right. I mean, guys, we're bumping up against our time here. This is definitely a topic that we'll be exploring in more detail in the weeks and months ahead. Super thankful for everyone joining today in different parts of the world. Want to just close it out with a quick question. What are you guys currently working on, and what is sort of the exciting thing in your guys' orbit that you're focused on these days? Carl, you want to kick it off? I know you just got back from a super fascinating trip to Egypt.
Yeah, so was invited over by Tom Middleton, global communication fame, to go into the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid in Giza to actually do some sound resonance explorations So archaeoacoustics, looking actually at the power of the chamber, but also the inner chamber, which is commonly known as the sarcophagus, but is actually more like a initiation chamber. So lying in there and toning was absolutely fascinating in terms of the ability to transform consciousness. So there was a group of us in there, around 25 of us, all toning for 2 hours. And yeah, so we've recorded that, and that will be presented as part of the Museum of Consciousness at Oxford University later in the month. So yeah, in terms of the Museum of Consciousness, it's lots of different artists all producing transmissions that should induce an altered state of consciousness within 10 minutes. So it's full of sound experiments, thought experiments, all sorts of different techniques, yoga nidra. But at the moment, we're focused on field recordings that take place in sacred space that will then transmit that altered state.
When will that be available? Just curious.
Well, it's museumofconsciousness.space is the website, and the idea is that it's almost like a Facebook of altered states. So unlike Facebook, all the artists retain the IP on their work, and yeah, it's a
wow.
It's a mycelium kind of foundation framework, and we're very much obsessed with sound and the ability to heal and excite consciousness.
We'll make sure to share all those links. Nice one, Carl. Really appreciate it. Drea, what are you working on these days from the lovely island in British Columbia? What kinds of things are you excited about?
Yeah, so besides continuing to contribute to Wavepaths, mostly all of that will be vocal layers, I believe. My own project, Anilah, I'll be producing more and more work that is geared toward supporting psychedelic states, but also, can be used just as a standalone experience. Because that I really am finding that there's ways to induce altered states of consciousness just with music alone. And so I'm getting really excited about different production techniques, engineering techniques, and as well as really expanding the capabilities of capturing different nuances in the voice and how that impacts the listener. So that's really my obsession these days, is very much the voice and the nervous system and the interaction between the two. And so creating a body of work that's very much, hundreds of layers of voice, and creating almost like sound mandalas that have a very specific, I would say, purpose in terms of how it's impacting the nervous system, and can also aid in mystical experiences and transformational experiences. So yeah, that's kind of my current obsession. Yeah,
and an obsession that warrants many hours of exploration. Thanks for sharing that, Dre. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Alex, with all the different hats you're wearing, what types of things are you working on these days and you're most excited about?
Yeah, what's really exciting right now, as we are discovering, or rather rediscovering, really the therapeutic, potential of sound and music. One of the things is music and psychedelics. So some research we're doing around the role of music in ketamine therapy. Also, 2 projects with psilocybin, which, by the way, are also looking for private donors, as government funding is scarce at the moment on these topics. Exploring the combination of music and psychedelics to promote brain plasticity. We know that music experience and expert musicians, that changes the brain for the better. And we also know that psychedelics can shape or reshape the brain. So what happens when you combine both in a way that you can drive the nervous system towards a optimal reconfiguration for health? The other side that I'm extremely excited about and really thrilled that both of you on the call also are looking into this is the non-drug induced altered state of consciousness using music, and the fields of music therapy, and music neuroscience have traditionally not been very good at talking to each other. So I'm trying to bridge this gap at my own level. We're working with a music therapist on a research at toning and the impact of toning on the nervous system and on the brain. And also I'm working with someone who's based in France, who was trained in the Mongol shamanic tradition of drumming and entering into a trance, and seeing how we can give access to those states to almost anyone by listening to some specially crafted sound loops that could also provide more healing or stress relief. So I think really the next couple of years are going to be very exciting around those topics. And as we rediscover the potential and we merge what technology enables with all these ancient technologies that were initially dismissed as, you know, superstitious, and that now we realize how ingenious and creative those people were with the means that they had. And you know, the example of the design of the caves or the tombs, we just start to understand how much they knew about, you know, consciousness. And yeah, I think it's going to be very promising as we learn and be more humble towards that.
Well said. Well, thanks again, guys. I mean, look, we'll make sure to share all the wonderful projects and organizations you guys are involved in, certainly amongst the leaders in this new and very important era of the role of psychedelics and altered states and music and sound. It's a huge topic, and one that, again, we'll continue to explore, and certainly everyone watching will make sure to follow up on the topics you guys have suggested. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. Before we part ways, just want to give a shout out to our partners, our presenting partner, StudioFeed, our foundational partners, Alchemic Sonic Environment, SUBPAC, Create Signal, Reverb Partners, and our collaborating partners, Sonar Works, Pearl, Pyramine, Bushido, and Music Motion. Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you and the team for putting this together.
Yeah, cheers, guys.
Great. Take it easy, guys.
Bye.
Bye.